Hey you guys, it's Peter and welcome to my channel, Peter Likes Books. And today I'm doing something that I haven't done before, I don't think, on here. So if you don't know, I have a book club called Peter's Book Club. And in 2019, we are doing a year of true crime, which means that every month we are picking a true crime book to read and discuss and read all the extra resources and watch all the footage about and all that kind of stuff. And then have a discussion at the end of the month. In the past year on the book club, I have always done my reviews after I've done the live stream, because we have a live stream at the end of the month. It's usually the last Sunday of every month. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouNow, listed below, you can come and you can join the live stream discussion of Ann Rule's book, The Stranger Beside Me, and we're going to discuss that in just a second. It is all about the Ted Bundy case. So anyway, I wanted to do my review first and kind of put some things out there so that we could have some things to talk about in the discussion tomorrow. And it's interesting that we picked this book. So when I say we, I mean Mel, who is the other person that is in charge of running Peter's Book Club with me. And she started off kind of being the assistant to the book club, and then the more and more that she's done, and she has become a huge part of this, and so we run the group together, and I couldn't do it without Mel, and I am so thankful for her. Tomorrow and every month going forward, she is going to be a huge part of the live streams, and in fact, we're going to live stream it together at parts, so that everybody can get to know Mel and see her input on that. And if you want to come in there and guest and share your opinion about The Stranger Beside Me or other true crime books, you can do that as well. What's interesting about picking this book is that when we picked this book I think we talked about it last month, but there were a couple different books we talked about, and this book had been so highly suggested to us that when we picked it, we had no idea that Netflix was going to be coming out with a series. They just came out with it. It's called, I think, Confessions with a Serial Killer or Confessions with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes. And we didn't know that Zac Efron was going to be starring in a movie that is going to be released at the Sundance Film Festival at the end of this month. So we had no idea that all of that, I'm trying to pull this up because I had it pulled up and then I went out of my phone. But we had no idea that all of that was going to happen when we picked this case to read about. So it's very, very interesting. The way that we decided to do a year of true crime on the book club, or in the book club, was that last year, we had kind of like at a moment's notice changed the book that we were going to read, and we ended up reading Michelle Mcnamara'S book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer, and it ended up being my favorite book that I read in 2018, and I became very obsessed with the Golden State Killer case, and I read every article about it, and the whole case, and all the DNA testing, and Paul Holes, the investigator, and all of it is so interesting to me. I've listened to all of the podcasts on it, and I just am infatuated with the case. Like, I've always loved true crime, but that case in particular is very, very interesting to me because it's current. It just happened not too long ago. Well, they just found him in the last year. So that was really fun to read, and that was probably the book that we read in 2018 that got the most participation in the live stream and the most people reading it. So when we were talking about what books that we should do going into 2019, we wanted to pick a theme, which is why we picked true crime, because so many people seemed interested in that. I've had quite a few people that have said that they don't want to read true crime, and I totally understand that. But it's interesting once you start reading more and more of it, because it kind of like all interlaps together. And before I get into this, I do want to say that if you haven't read The Stranger Beside Me, one of the things you find out is that at the end of his life, Ted Bundy had several he had ideas as to how to find the Green River Killer. So we had already picked our February book. We were going to read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, and which was the very first kind of nonfiction book, and it was the very first true crime book, supposedly. And so we thought that was an important book to read for the book club. If we were going to do a year of true crime, we thought that was important. But in talking today, after having read the book and all this kind of stuff and reading articles and how much Ted Bundy had to do with the Green River Killer, we thought maybe we should devote February to the Green River Killer. So Mel has put up a poll over on the Goodreads book club. If you want to join the book club, people ask all the time. All you have to do is go below. There's a link to the Goodreads book club. You can watch the videos over here, come to the live stream, just read the book if you want to. That's all you have to do. She has put a poll up over on Goodreads and it's going to go up for the next 24 hours. We'll announce it in the live stream which book we're going to actually read, and then I'll announce it in my next BookTube video. whether or not we're going to read In Cold Blood and go with what we had already decided, or whether we're going to read about the Green River Killer. Now, what's interesting about this is that we read The Stranger Beside Me, which was Ann Rule's book about Ted Bundy, and probably one of the top 3 books that was written about the Green River Killer is also by Ann Rule, which means that we would be reading 2 Ann Rule books in a row, and I'm totally fine with that. I have to say that when I started this book, I didn't love it because it was from Ann Rule's point of view, but over time, her story and her personal account and her knowing Ted and things became very, very interesting to me, and I have to say that I think I wouldn't have been as interested in this book or as taken with this book if it hadn't been written by Ann Rule from her point of view. And that's not something that I would have said when I started it. So if you guys don't know anything about this, let me go in here, pulling it up, and I will read you the very short synopsis that it has on here. So let me throw up the book. The Stranger Beside Me, Ted Bundy, The Shocking Inside Story. And the synopsis is, Ann Rule was a writer working on the biggest story of her life, tracking down a brutal mass murderer. Little did she know that Ted Bundy, her close friend, was the savage slayer she was hunting. And let me go in here, and Ann Rule has passed away, but I want to read you a little bit about her profile in case you guys don't know anything about Ann Rule. Ann Rule was a popular American true crime writer, raised in law enforcement and criminal justice system environment. She grew up wanting to work in law enforcement herself. She was a former Seattle policewoman and was well educated in psychology and criminology. She came to prominence with her first book, The Stranger Beside Me, about the Ted Bundy murders. At the time she started researching the book, the murders were still unsolved. In the course of time, it became clear that the killer was Bundy, her friend and her colleague, as a trained volunteer on the suicide hotline at the Seattle Washington Crisis Clinic, giving her a unique distinction among true crime writers. Rule won 2 Anthony Awards from Boucheron, the Mystery Fans Organization. She was nominated 3 times for the Edgar Awards from the Mystery Writers of America. She is highly regarded by creating the true crime genre as it exists today. Ann Rule also wrote under the name Andy Stack. Her daughter is Goodreads author Leslie Rule. And I didn't know any of that last part. And she has written, let's see, The Stranger Beside Me, about Ted Bundy. Small Sacrifices, A True Story of Passion and Murder, which is really famous as well. Green River, Running Red, The Real Story of the Green River Killer, which is probably the book that we're going to read if you guys choose for us to. If You Really Loved Me. And Never Let Her Go, Thomas Capano, The Deadly Seducer. Bitter Harvest, Every Breath You Take, A True Story of Obsession, Revenge, and Murder. Dead by Sunset, Perfect Husband, Perfect Killer. Everything She Ever Wanted, The I-5 Killer, Too Late to Say Goodbye, A True Story of Murder and Betrayal, Lust Killer, The Want Ad Killer, Heart Full of Lies, A Rose for Her Grave, and Other True Cases, You Belong to Me. Oh my God, how long does this go on? There's tons and tons and tons of them, so I won't go in there and read all of them, but I have to say that her perspective was very interesting to me. Now, I will tell you, and I don't want to ruin this, because when Mel and I were talking about it on the phone, I said, we've got to save some of this conversation for tomorrow. Oh, bit the side of my mouth. Some of this conversation for tomorrow for the live stream, because I don't want it to all be, things I've talked about in the video or whatever, or conversations that we've already had. But I didn't know much about Ted Bundy or these cases, and supposedly it is said that he killed close to 36 or 37 women, horribly killed them, and but there is a part in the book where he says add a digit to that. Speculation is that he probably killed closer to 100 women, and it's horrifying, just the details of it. I will tell you this, once I finished the book, I started reading, I started watching the tapes on Netflix. I think Netflix has actually put out a warning about these videos. There's like 4, I think, in the series. The weird thing about it is, I never really get scared watching things or reading things unless they're kind of like paranormal. That's like really the only area that really scares me. And I have to say that as I finished watching the first, I was almost at the end of the first episode, I turned it off and I went upstairs to go to bed, and I got really scared that night. And it was weird because I never got that from reading the book. Reading the book combined with the Netflix, seeing him kind of how he was in person is very bizarre. So if you haven't read The Stranger Beside Me, the book is really Ann Rule's account of how she knew him. And it starts actually with kind of the end of the story, which is when he was in Florida, and he killed several women in a sorority house, and then he went on to go kill another young lady. I think she was 12 years old. And there's so many, I don't know all their names by heart and all that kind of stuff, but we'll probably get into more of that in the live stream. And then it goes back and it talks about how Ann Rule met him, and that she met him because she was volunteering on a suicide crisis hotline, and he was also there working as a graduate student, I believe. And so they became friendly. She only worked one night a week, but they became friendly, and they worked together on this crisis hotline. And then over the years, she kind of, like, they stayed in touch and talked. And, you know, one of the things that was interesting to me was Ann Rule's absolute denial, I think, through the entire story of really believing that he had done this. Like, she really struggled with believing that her friend was responsible for killing all of these women when basically the evidence was right in front of her. She kind of wavered back and forth and all this kind of stuff. The other thing was, you know, this kind of, next to Charles Manson, Ted Bundy was one person, one serial killer that got a lot of kind of like pop acclaim. There were a lot of young women that came to his trial and sat in the front row. And, you know, she even talks about it in her book, about how they would call her, or they would write her later and say that they just couldn't get over, like, you know, his execution, that they were really struggling because they were so in love with him, and that he wouldn't have done those things to them, if that makes sense. The whole book is so interesting, the way that she takes it. I will say, and I was talking to Mel about this today, that after having read the book and then starting to watch the tapes on Netflix, it made me wonder really how well Ann Rule knew Ted Bundy. And I kind of wondered if there wasn't some kind of deal that they had worked out towards the end of his life, that she would write this book, but then it was kind of more of a control thing. And that he got very upset with her because she became more of, like, you know, the reporter instead of the friend. And so it was kind of, it felt to me like he withdrew and he, like, withheld a lot of information from her. There were points in the book when she was supposed to actually go and interview him, or he was going to give her information on the phone, and then it didn't turn out that way. And he actually gave his confession to somebody else. So it's interesting to me that she was so close and he was the person that, you know, he didn't do that. Plus, you know, he was never able to really get that close to women, except for two women that he was romantically involved with closely. Well, two women on the outside that he was close to. There was also a woman that he, well, there were several women while he was in jail that he got really close to, but one of them was this Carol Ann Boone. Okay, that whole story, we'll have to talk about that in the live stream. But he ended up marrying this Carol Ann Boone in the courtroom in Miami, Florida. And then they ended up supposedly having a child that is alive and out there today somewhere. So, and I'm not going to go into all of that, but I was very interested in Googling and looking into that there are tons and tons and tons of threads of people speculating what happened to Carol Ann Boone and Carol Ann Boone and her daughter and her son, because she had a teenage son at the time that she married Ted Bundy. And she has since passed away, I believe. But there is, like, all of this information out there, people trying to find out what really happened. And the consensus is kind of like, let's just leave this girl alone, this daughter of his, supposedly. That if you see the baby pictures of them, they look very similar. The daughter and Ted Bundy look very similar. But the consensus is kind of like, let's let her live her life. She didn't choose to be brought into all of this. You know, what's interesting is when you hear the early part of the story, he's kind of this guy that never really fit in, and then his arrogance over time of wanting to be knowing everything about the legal system whenever. One of the most baffling things to me was that Ted Bundy defended himself in these court, cases. And there was a part in there when, so it's the Chi Omega house in, I think Gainesville, I think, is where he killed these two women and brutally assaulted two other women. And at one point, the police officer that went into the I think it's the Chi Omega house, the police officer that went in there, he is actually questioning on the stand. So it's killer questioning the police officer. And it's very interesting, this back and forth that goes on, and the arrogance that you would have to imagine that this serial killer would sit there and have no problem, interviewing this guy. It just was baffling to read and actually believe that this went on. What's interesting to me is that he was executed when I would have been in high school, and I don't really remember a whole lot about that happening at that time, and this kind of societal obsession over him. I do, remember a lot about people talking about Charles Manson, which actually happened a lot earlier. So anyway, I ended up giving the book 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was really, really well done. I have to say, I don't think I would have been as interested in this case if it hadn't been told from the point of view of Ann Rule and how she knew Ted Bundy. I also loved that Ann Rule paid, homage to the victims and their stories. I think that's really important whenever reading about true crime, that we sensationalize and we give a lot of attention to the serial killer instead of the victims. One of the things I loved about I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and also Paul Holes, the investigator's story about the Golden State Killer, which was called Evil Has a Name, and it's an Audible exclusive, was that they paid homage to the victims, and they talked a lot about them and their families. And I think that those are the people that are forgotten in these stories, and I think it's important that we always remember that, I think as a cultural study, I'll Be Gone, The Stranger Beside Me, it's still my favorite book. The Stranger Beside Me was interesting to read because it made you think it could be somebody that you see every day that could be doing this, that lives a double life. And it was very, very scary, I think, from that point of view. Makes you start questioning the people that you know in your own life. And I think that's what Ann Rule realized over time. I would definitely recommend this to anybody that loves true crime or loves investigative books and things like that. I think it's fantastic. Please join us for the live stream tomorrow. Go over to the Goodreads book club and put in your vote for what you'd like to read. If we're going to read In Cold Blood like we had already planned, or Ann Rule's book. I think it's called Green River Running Red, and that would be our February book. So let me know. Put it in the comment section below if you don't want to join the Goodreads group. I hope you guys will join us for tomorrow. Let me know what you thought about this book if you read it, and if you have suggestions for other true crime books, I would love to hear that as well. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.